So countdown now. So 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5.
Hello everyone and welcome to the final session of the Foundation to Level 2 literacy webinar series. Tonight we are talking about the writing process. I have to give you a little bit of a warning on this one. I'm so passionate about writing and particularly about the writing process and helping teachers to understand it so they can teach writing more effectively to their students. So if I speak a little bit fast or you think, oh my goodness, she needs to calm down a bit, that's why. Okay, so to start, I of course would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we all come to this session. I am fortunate enough to be living on Wurundjeri land. I realised recently all of the land that I've lived on has always been the land of people who have been people of the bush. So Wurundjeri, I was doing some research not too long ago and learnt that Wurrung is a Woiwurrung word for the Manigum, and Juri is the Woiwurrung word for grub. So Wurundjeri are the Bardi Grub people. So I'm lucky to be living here because I'm a girl who loves bush, and that is exactly where I live. So I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and thank them for taking care of this beautiful land for countless generations. If you haven't met me before, my name is Narissa Leung. I'm an education consultant here in Victoria. This year I was lucky enough to be a Book Week judge. I was on the Eve Pownell Information Book category. So you may have seen the winner, Dry to Dry, and spoken about that with your students. I am at RisL on Twitter. Haven't put anything on there for a while, probably need to get back on there. And I run the Auslit Teacher website and Instagram, where I share mentor texts for teaching literacy and basically share resources to help teachers to teach literacy to their students in a more effective way. I like to introduce myself by way of what I'm currently reading. So on the far right, you'll see I recently finished reading Hollowpox, which is part of the Nevermore series. This was written by Jessica Townsend. She's an Australian author, a young Australian author. And oh my goodness, I loved this. I love the whole series. This is the third book in the series. She's currently working on the fourth. I'm so excited to hear that. This series, the Nevermore series, if you loved Harry Potter, you know, I think there are a few of you out there who probably loved Harry Potter. It's a mix between, or a cross between Harry Potter and Alice in Wonderland. And those two things joined together, sort of quirky characters. You know, she goes to a school to learn how to do magic. I just loved it. And it's so good to escape life when you're reading that book. Although I must say, Hollowpox is a little bit close to life because it's about a disease that comes in and they end up finding themselves working under a curfew. And I thought, wow, I wonder how much of the current situation was taken into, you know, or impacted her writing for the book. But the other one that I'm currently reading is The Stolen Prince of Cloudburst. So Hollowpox, I would say, class novel from year 4 up. The Stolen Prince of Cloudburst, you may recognise this front cover. It was one of the honour books for this year's Book Week Awards. This is a very thick book. It's over an inch thick, I'm going to say, but it's a very easy read. And it's Jacqueline Moriarty, you know, who is it? Is it Leanne Moriarty that wrote Nine Perfect Strangers? It's her sister, so there's a bit of writing in the family. And the voice of the author really sucked me into this one. I love it. And it's about magic and all those types of things. So I reckon I know this is an after 2 webinar, but I think grade 3 or top grade 2s, I'd probably, maybe I'd even read it to the grade 2s as a class novel. So that's my recommendations. Now, where are we in the webinar series? We're at the last session, right down the bottom here, talking about the writing process. Just in case this is the first time you've been with us for the webinar series, all of the previous webinars are available to watch they're on YouTube. So if you go onto Basto's YouTube channel, you can access them there. And actually there's some other great videos on the Basto YouTube channel as well. So I've talked about workshop model, speaking and listening, phonological awareness, interactive writing, and today we are talking about the writing process. Now, it's not all just me talking. The best workshops or the best webinars involve lots of interaction from you as well. At the top of the page, you can see I've put the link to our Padlet. So hopefully this was emailed out to you. We love to hear your comments. If you've got any resources that link to the things that I'm talking about, if there are books that you've used that you'd recommend to others or lessons, anything along those lines, we'd love to see you add them into the Padlet. The other great thing about the Padlet is that it's accessible after today finishes. So if you think, oh my goodness, there are lots of comments being added, I can't keep up and I can't listen to RIS at the same time as reading all of these, totally fine. You can use this address, come back to it later and access anything that is shared in that Padlet. So there's the Padlet. Oh, I will say on the right hand side too, I've got the image of the Fuse website. If you go on there, you can access all of the previous videos, the supporting resources packs that go with the videos as well. The supporting resources pack, we are going to use it a lot tonight. So one of the department team have hopefully put a link in the chat, in the Padlet, to the supporting resources pack, because tonight we're going to have a look at a few different resources that I've included in that. So, all right, so our agenda for the night is we're going to start by talking about why teach writing. And I understand that you're probably thinking, well, Riss, you talked about writing last time. Isn't that sort of backwards? Now you're going to start, we've already spoken about writing and now you're going to start talking about why. I think it's really important for us to talk about the why do we teach writing, because it impacts how we teach writing. So I'll talk a bit more about that. And then, as the name of the webinar suggests, we're going to talk about the writing process. So I'm going to go through each of the phases of the writing process and give you some practical examples of what that could look like in your F2 classroom. Understanding goals, all good teaching has learning intentions. So by the end of this session, my plan for you is that you will build your understanding of the writing process. You'll deepen your understanding of the elements of effective writing instruction in an F2 classroom, and always, always reflect on your own practice. So your success criteria is that you'll be able to outline the writing requirements in the F2 curriculum, identify elements of effective writing instruction, and reflect on the literacy practices in your school. Okay, so let's get started with why. And Simon Sinek always says you should start with why. So, I'm not going to question what he says. Let's start with why. Now, as I said, the reason that I think we need to start by talking about why teach writing is because I have found that in literacy, writing is an area of the curriculum where teachers often don't have a lot of confidence. And part of that is because we don't view ourselves as writers often. So when I'm working in schools, I'll generally say, put up your hand if you're a reader, or let's all share some books that we're reading. And teachers don't have any problems with doing that, because most teachers, rightly so, view themselves as readers. And all teachers should be readers, but that's for another workshop. However, when I ask the same for writing, put your hand up if you're a writer, very few teachers will raise their hand and own it. Yeah, I'm a writer. And that has implications for how you teach writing if you don't see yourself as a writer. I'm not judging anyone who says that they don't think they're a writer. Even I write every single week. I write a blog that I put on my Auslit Teacher website. I write a newsletter every week. Even I struggle to say I am a writer. And I think part of that is because I have I think it's a common thing that people think we have to have published a book to be a writer. I've even had things published and I still find it hard to say I am a writer. All right, so if I don't teach, if I'm not a writer myself, or I don't view myself as a writer, then sometimes you might not feel qualified to teach writing in the first place, and you can start to narrow your thinking around why do we teach writing. So what I want to do is broaden your thinking around why it's important that we teach writing, because if we have a broad understanding of why we should teach writing, then it will impact how you teach writing and what you teach when you are writing. So, why teach writing? Good writers, and this is, and I'm going to say, I was recently reflecting during the week. I'm going to call it a project. I'm doing a little writing project at the minute, and during the week I hit the 30,000 word mark of my project. And I reflected on what I've learned about writing by engaging in this project that I've been doing, been writing this for months now. And I think wouldn't necessarily say I absolutely love writing. And I did do a blog on this recently. I actually hate writing my weekly blog. I find it to be so painful. And when I stop to think about it, it's because of the brain work that is involved with writing. Writing is hard work. And when I started to think about why is it such hard work? Well, these are some of the things that I came to realize. Good writers are observers. Our brains are constantly, switched on, and we're looking around the world because we have to draw from the world as inspiration for our writing. We're pinching and borrowing from different things that go on in our lives and around the world. Good writers are logical organizers, and so that our sentences make sense, our paragraphs make sense. It flows from start to finish. We have to develop that ability to develop logically, develop our writing logically, and that can be challenging sometimes. This is one of the big ones for me. They are critical and creative thinkers. And, I'm starting to think, hang on, this is ticking a few of the capabilities in the curriculum, isn't it? Critical and creative thinkers. You have to be creative so that you can, say, if you're writing narrative, so that you can develop creative characters or problems, that type of thing. But these are the main ones for me, that when I was reflecting on my writing that I've been doing, why I find it so hard is because writing, the whole act of writing is problem solving. It is, as soon as your pen hits the page or as soon as you start typing the first word on your screen, you are in problem solving mode. Your problem is, you're thinking, how will I start this sentence so that it engages the reader? How can I finish the sentence? How can I make this sentence make sense? How can I get this character to talk to the other character in a way that sounds fluent? How can I convince my reader that, this problem is something they need to pay attention to? How can I create a problem in my story? How can I solve that problem in my story? Where do I need to put punctuation? Your brain is constantly throwing problems at you, and you have to work through those problems. And that's the part of writing that I find the most challenging. So because you're having to work through all those problems, you also have to become a decision maker, because you can't sit around taking forever to solve those problems. You've got to start to learn to do it faster, so that, I'm a very slow writer, and I think it's because I dwell too much on the problem solving stage. So you do develop that capacity to be a decision maker through writing. And of course, you're a solution finder, because there are so many problems. You are having to be creative and solve those problems by finding solutions. So what does all of that mean? That means that good writers are thinkers. Our brains are constantly working. And I think if you don't write regularly yourself, you can forget all of this. You can, be tricked into thinking that writing is just about spelling, or it's just about copying something from the board. It is so much more than that. There's so much thinking that goes on in writing, which is why it can be really hard work. I think we think about good writers are thinkers. And doesn't our society need people who have all of these skills? So that's why I'm so passionate about teaching writing, because I think it's more than just let's teach everyone how to write great narratives, or let's teach everyone how to write great persuasive writing. The skills that they're learning as a result of that are going to benefit them and the greater society when they move out into the world. As Malala says here, one child, one teacher, one book, one pen can change the world. And this, for me, highlights that idea that Sometimes when I work with teachers, they say, oh, well, they're not, all of our kids aren't going to go off and be authors, so why do we need to teach them how to write narrative? Or, they're not all going to be journalists. I think we have to have a much broader view of the benefits of teaching writing. And part of that is that words and writing have power. That it's that whole idea of the pen is mightier than the sword. So if we have that, if we understand that there is a power in writing and that you can get things done with writing, you can change people's viewpoints. You can convince people of something. You can educate people on a topic, or you can entertain them. Let's teach our kids how to wield that power so that they can use it however they want to use it in the future. Whether that be go on and be an author, whether that be in their daily work as whatever job they take on. We want them to have the option to be able to use this power if they choose to. But even if they don't go on to do something specific with writing, at least they're going to develop all of those skills that we talked about on the previous slide. Now, one thing I want to address is this idea that, technology, with all this technology now, we don't have to teach writing as much because basically technology is going to do it all for them. So I want to share this. I just love this piece of writing from a student. And this is probably something that you might be experiencing with people that young people that at the moment. I'll read it out first and I'm going to talk about it. It says, hi, my name is something on YouTube. On YouTube at the moment, I have 25 subscribers. The very first video I did got 85 views. This is pretty good for me, and I'm only 9 years of age. When I'm 15 or so, I will quit school and do YouTube. Does this sound familiar? This seems to be a consistently held view by a number of kids at the moment, and certainly I have one in my family. This idea, that final sentence, when I'm 15 or so, I'll quit school and I'll do YouTube. Now, why am I talking about this when we're talking about writing? Is because I wanted to share a personal story with you on this. On the left, this is my nephew, Isaac. I refer to him as Minion Isaac. And Minion Isaac, I'm going to be a YouTuber. So, I don't really need anything at school. It's all sort of outdated what they're teaching me. I'm going to be a YouTuber. I'm going to make all this money. And basically, everything they're teaching me at school is sort of not of any interest to me. Well, young Isaac is obsessed with what he calls subs, which is subscribers to his YouTube channel and his Instagram account. He's footylover_YT for YouTube. And so he's started to slowly work out if he wants to increase his subscribers to his channel, then he needs to reach a broader market than what he's currently reaching. So I had a little chat to Isaac. He's in year 9 now. And I said to him, if you want to increase your subscribers, then you need to start writing more professionally, because one thing about Isaac is he uses full stops and punctuation as if he has to pay $1 each time he uses one. So he never uses them, right? And so on his YouTube channel and on his Instagram account, he just doesn't have any punctuation at all. And capital letters, who needs those? So I had a chat to him and said, if you want to increase your subscriber base, then you need to start coming across as more professional than a 5-year-old kid, because you're not going to get any adults. You're really limiting your market. So he started finally to take good old Auntie Rissa's advice and started to slowly grow his subscriber list. And then he came to this interview that I've got on the screen here. He wanted to reach out and do an interview with Danny. Oh, what's this guy's name? He's the banner maker for the Bulldogs. Like, obviously, I'm not a big football Bulldogs person. And so he realized that he's going to have to send this guy an email, and it needs to sound professional enough to get him to respond and agree to come onto his YouTube channel to do an interview. So that was guess what? Guess who needs literacy skills all of a sudden? Previously wouldn't listen to much that I had to say about literacy, and now he's, could you help me with this? It needs to sound a lot more professional. I've got to, my writing has to significantly improve. And then the other part of it is that when he was preparing for the interview, he realized he had to do a whole lot of research to find out about Danny McGinley, to construct his questions so that the interview had a flow. He's taken himself through the writing process by doing that, and wasn't aware at the time. So he didn't have any connection between all this literacy stuff I've been learning at school and all of these skills I now need as a YouTuber. So no, you can't just quit school and do YouTube without thinking that writing or literacy is important. It's actually more important than ever, especially if you want to do a good job and get lots of subs, as he said. So why teach writing? We need to keep all of these things in mind when approaching writing instruction, and that will help us to prepare the students in our classes now for what writing could look like for them in the future. And especially, we're all going through remote learning or have just been through remote learning. Writing changes over time, so we need to make sure that our students are prepared for that. One thing that this means is that writing doesn't equal spelling. It's not a synonym for spelling. And this is a common misconception that happens in the after 2 years, where we start to think of the act of writing, the most important part or the only part, writing equals spelling or writing equals handwriting. We can't, if we teach in that way, then we're not going to produce students who have these skills in the list on the left-hand side here. We have to view writing as a whole and ensure that the instruction that we're giving students right from foundation is setting them up to understand writing as a whole as well, rather than them thinking, oh, writing equals spelling, I'm terrible at spelling, therefore I'm terrible at writing. Well, no, actually, you can be a poor speller, but an excellent writer still. So there's more. We can't just reduce writing just to thinking that it is spelling or handwriting. What do we mean by writing? Well, the job of writing is to convey a message from you as the writer to your audience, to your reader. So you have a message, whether it's a message about, and you want to entertain them, whether it's something that you want to educate them, whether you want to convince them of something. You have a message that you want your reader to understand. And the job of writing is to convey that message. So importantly, you can do that through text, you can do it through images, and you can even do it through sound. Like if you think about, people who write music, well, yeah, they're conveying a message. I've got a little sound here. I don't know if it will work. What sound is that? That's the annoying sound of you've made a mistake on your computer. So that conveys a message that, hello, you're doing something wrong, stop doing it. And I seem to get that one a lot on my computer. So I've got this here. We've got a sample of a conveying a message via text, how to make funny faces. First you choose a face, then you make your funny face. Next, show it to a friend. 4, finally return to your normal face, which I love that they've given a little warning. Just don't forget to return to your normal face. The middle picture, that is caution, hati-hati. I don't know Indonesian, but the picture enough conveys the message for me. So I know, and I can see the English above it, that probably means caution. So I saw this one at the Melbourne Zoo and I really loved it. It's like, watch out for elephants walking past. So that's what we mean by writing. Now, with that broad thinking about what writing is and why we should teach writing, I wanted to draw to your attention the literacy learning progressions. Now, this is on the VCAA website. Not everyone, I don't think they're widely known about, and that's why I like to bring them up, because sometimes people it's the first time you've ever heard about it, and that's totally fine. The literacy learning progressions, if you want to find them, I don't know, there's probably an easier way to find them. I just Google VCAA literacy learning progressions. There are also numeracy learning progressions if you're interested, but we're not talking about numeracy tonight, so I won't talk about that. So what are the literacy learning progressions? Well, I've just grabbed this snippet of information off the website. They outline a sequence of indicators of increasingly sophisticated use of aspects of English. They're designed to help teachers develop a detailed and nuanced understanding of student literacy development, especially in the early years, and this is the important part, by outlining a set of observable steps within particular areas of literacy. So what does all that mean? Well, basically, they're a continuum of learning in each of the little broken down areas in the literacy curriculum. So not in the curriculum, in how students learn about, in this case, writing. They can be particularly useful to guide teachers when planning interventions, especially for students achieving above and below the age equivalent expectations. They are not the curriculum, though. That's something that I need to point that out. It's more about being aware of these so you can spot the growth in your students in particular areas of literacy. So when it comes to writing, these are the areas that are available as PDF downloads. There's creating texts, part A. There's creating text, part B. It's foundation to level 3 is part A. I've got 8 on there. I got a bit excited, I think. Grammar, punctuation, spelling, and handwriting. Why am I pointing this out? Because I want you to see that it's much broader than just spelling or just handwriting. So I think it's important to have a look at these so that when you're looking at student writing and how students are developing as writers, you can be looking at them in a more holistic view. So basically they look like this. I don't expect you to be able to read all of the text on this screen. Good news for you is that I've put a copy of each of these in the supporting resources pack. So this is creating text part A. So it shows on the left-hand side, the Victorian Curriculum Foundation level, what you would be seeing a student doing in terms of creating text, right up to, on the right-hand side, the Victorian Curriculum Level 2, the types of things that you'd be seeing students do in the creating texts area. So as a teacher, these are observable steps that you could be looking for in your students to see. And I think this is the thing that I find useful about this is that it helps you to work out where is this particular student now, and what's the area where if I just nudge them forward just a little bit, what might that look like? What are the skills that I might be reaching for or getting the student to reach for next in their writing? And what came before where they are now? That's what I think these are useful for. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide 5 minutes for you to have a read through some of these learning progressions and have a look and see. Probably start with the creating text one because it's foundation to level 3, so it's relevant for the F2 teachers. But I want you to have a look and think, what are you noticing when you're reading through these? And also, how could you use these? I'd love to see your, or how have you used these already? I'd love to see your thinking in the chat. So I'm going to put the timer on for 5 minutes and then we'll be back to move on.
Test. We get to speak.
Oh, I am just about to go and lock my dogs up. I'm so sorry. Okay, 5 minutes, very quick. I know that you probably didn't get enough time to read all of them. I just had to quickly use the time to lock my naughty cavoodles away because they are being very noisy today. But fortunately, everyone's been remote teaching, so you'll totally understand that feeling. I did give everyone in the house a strict warning about noise, and obviously the girls didn't get the message, so hopefully we won't hear from them again. All right, I've had a look at the chat. I see a few of you are just adding your comments in now, but this is a resource that you can go back to all of the time, and do check out the numeracy ones as well, because I think they're such a great resource. And it's also one that can just help to pull you out of that, oh, writing equals spelling or writing equals handwriting only. And that's really why I wanted you to read the Creating Text one, to get that broader and keep that broader view of what writing is and what we're talking about. Now, this is not a mathematical graph. I'll just tell you that right now. This is how I think, right? So when I'm thinking about writing and looking at these learning progressions, I sort of think in my head when I'm thinking about a specific writer that I'm working with, I've got these little bar graphs in my head. I'm thinking, oh yeah, they're strong in creating text, but they're not as strong in spelling. They're fairly strong in handwriting, but they're not as strong in punctuation. So in my mind, this is just how my brain works, and it may be helpful for you. It may be completely confusing. I'm trying to view them holistically to say, well, as a writer, what do they know? What's their knowledge of writing? And yes, they may be really strong in one area, and then that gives me the opportunity to focus my attention or my explicit teaching in another area. But whether that's helpful or not, I don't know. But that's just how I view it. Okay, so exciting. Now we get to talk about the writing process. So now that we have a broad understanding of why we should teach writing, and that idea that we're not just teaching writing so that we can create authors, we're teaching writing so that we can create thinkers. Now let's start to look at the practical side of things, and we're going to look at the writing process. So I want to start this by just giving you an overview of the writing process before I zoom in on each of the phases of the process. Now, I have put an article, I've said that writing process, but actually I think that can be a bit misleading, because basically when I'm teaching writing and when you're teaching writing, I think we need to teach authentic writing to students. We need to think about, what does writing look like in the real world outside of school? So out in the wild, if I was outside of school and I was constructing a piece of writing, whatever that might be, how does that happen? What does it look like? And then we bring those practices into school. So what I mean by that is that not everyone follows this perfectly formed, we don't all start by planning before moving on to drafting, before moving on to revising, then moving on to editing, then moving on to publishing. In the writing in the real world outside of school is actually, usually we sort of bounce around between these things. And the truth be known, some of us don't actually plan before we draft. And that's something that we just have to be aware of as teachers and actually learn to be okay with that. But I'll talk a bit more about that. So just to give you an overview of this, generally when you talk about writing process in schools, writers follow a process of where they engage in what we call pre-writing or planning. I actually really like, the word I like to use for this more so is from Claire Saxby. She's an Australian author, written a few picture story books. She uses the term collecting. So, and I really like that because that sort of matches what I do. Collecting is about sort of looking out in the world and kind of thinking about possible writing topics and just collecting little thoughts and ideas and sort of storing them away, so that when you come down to write, you've got a little collection of ideas or logically sequenced ideas ready to go. So that's one way of viewing it. Planning is generally, about thinking, where am I going to take this piece of writing? Now, I need to just be honest. I actually don't usually do a lot of planning before I write. I usually start by drafting. I just dive straight in, but I do at some stage have to come up for air, and I do have to go, okay, where is this piece going? And I end up going back to planning. So that's just the process that works for me. Other people really like to plan every single thing out before they start drafting. And that's the whole idea of the writing process, is to find a process that works for your writers. So drafting is where we actually start to get our ideas onto paper. I call this the brain dump. All right. So this is where you're trying to transfer everything that's into your head onto the paper. That is the only purpose of drafting, is just to get everything in there, down there. Because after you've got it down onto the page, then you can start to sculpt it, and that's revising. Now, big misunderstanding between revising and editing, and I see this all the time in education. Often, teachers will refer to this as revising and editing, as if those two things are the same. They're not synonyms. They don't mean the same thing. And I always say, in fact, they should never be said in the same sentence. So when we're talking to our students, I don't think it's helpful for you to say, okay, everyone, we're going to revise and edit our work. You are either revising your work or you are editing your work. Right, now let me talk about the difference between the two. Revising is all about clarity of message. It's all about, so when we're doing our brain dump, we're getting our thinking onto the paper. Then when we're revising, which it means, when we think about it, revise to re-see, that gives us the opportunity to start to think about our reader. And we start to think, oh, okay, well, I've got all my ideas down, and now I've got to see, does this make sense for my reader? Are they going to understand what I was talking about here? Does my reader need more detail here? Is this going to sound smooth for my reader? So that's what revising is about. It's all about improving the clarity of the message. Now, over on the other side, we have editing. Editing is purely about conventions: spelling, punctuation, grammar. Okay, so that's when we're going to go and look for our capital letters. We're going to search for places to put our full stops. We will look at, ways that we can check our spelling. Those two things are completely separate. They're not the same thing, so stop using them together. Revising, we're going to go back and maybe add some sentences or add some detail or take out some extra words. Editing, we're looking at spelling, punctuation, and grammar. Editing is all about the readability of the message. So because remember, writing's about conveying a message. So I've drafted it. I've come back now that I've got the opportunity to revise, and I'm thinking, is my message clear enough? Are they going to understand this? And then the final step before I publish is to make sure that my message is readable. And I do that by looking at my spelling, punctuation, and grammar. Not all at the same time, because it'll be too overwhelming, one at a time. Now, publishing is generally the last step in the process, although not always. And publishing is an important part of the process, and it's one that we sometimes I think we leave it off in schools because we're so busy to get on to the next piece of writing, but it's critically important that our students get that opportunity to publish their writing. And I'm going to talk more about that. So that's the writing process in a nutshell, a big nutshell, but an important one. My main point that I want you to remember today is that revising is different to editing, and that each of the steps or each of the phases, whatever you want to call them in the writing process, needs explicit instruction around it. Our kids aren't born knowing how to do all of these steps. They need us to demonstrate what they look like. All right. So let's zoom in on pre-writing or planning or collecting or whatever you want to call it. This phase involves loads of thinking. It involves looking out into the world for ideas. It involves lots of discussion about where writers get their ideas. Now, generally, and this is a huge generalization, generally, students come into school really excited and they think they're full of ideas, and we sort of teach it out of them. So by the time they get to grade 3, they really struggle for ideas. we want to keep that excitement about ideas right from foundation. So one of the, just a really easy or a simple step that you can take here is, as soon as you finish reading any book to your students, just a simple question of, where do you think the writer got the idea for this book? Just to, I guess, build their thinking around, oh yeah, maybe I could get a similar idea. So that's one simple step that you can take, and it doesn't take long. Just at the end of reading any picture storybook or the like, wow, where do you think the writer got the idea for that? And we could have an anchor chart. We could have a little poster in our room where we add places that writers get their idea. Something that's important to convey here is that writing is about sending a message. So what's yours, right? So that we're not reducing writing to just spelling or handwriting, and we keep that focus, squarely on the idea that it's, what we're doing here is we're trying to convey a message. So what is that message that you want to share with someone? And another part that we need to really clarify for our students is to think about their purpose and their audience. Who might read this, right? And what do you want to tell them? Let's keep that person in your mind when you're writing this. So writing is conveying a message. What is your message? Where do writers get their ideas? Let's do loads and loads of talk about that. And speaking of talk, this is so critical, particularly in this pre-writing phase, before we've got our pencils out and we've started to, get our ideas down onto paper. Building loads and loads of talk in the classroom here. So we could be brainstorming ideas as a class. We could be brainstorming ideas in pairs about things that we might want to write about. And I talked about this in the last webinar when I was talking about interactive writing, is we want to do less of that writing where we are giving a topic that for our students to write about, because an important part of being a lifelong writer is being able to come up with a topic yourself and thinking of your own idea of something to write about. So let's start teaching that right from foundation. So lots and lots of talk so we can road test our ideas with our partner before we start to, before we're faced with a blank page that needs to be filled with our ideas. The final dot point I have here is to remember that there are loads of different ways to plan for writing. So, there's no one perfect graphic organizer that's going to make everyone produce an amazing piece of text. Planning looks different for everyone, and published authors all plan in different ways. And again, some of them don't plan, they start writing first. So yes, graphic organizers are one way that you could plan. You might do drawing as you're planning. You might do dot points. You might do a storyboard. There are lots of different ways to plan for writing. And I think it's important when we are talking to students about planning, particularly say when we're in even grade 2, if we're introducing a graphic organizer to help students to plan their writing, the way that we introduce it is we need to say to them, graphic organizers can help some writers to plan their writing. So we're going to test to see if that helps you with your writing. It's a strategy. We don't want kids to think, oh man, this thing, I can't understand it. It doesn't help me with writing. So we want to have that conversation at the end to say, now, in this, when we were doing writing today, we used this graphic organizer to help us plan our thoughts. Did that help you, or was it a hindrance for you? So, because we want our students to start to learn what helps them to plan their writing effectively. Now, I really love this quote, imagination concerns manipulating what you know to create something new. So when we're talking about coming up with ideas for writing, it is so important that we understand that it's imagination goes from the known to the new. So how do we fill up our students' well of the known, or what they already know? Reading aloud to them is essential. Loads and loads of read alouds, lots of picture storybook sharing, lots of class novel sharing. We have to bathe them in wonderful examples of literature so they have a reference point for what they could potentially write about when they come to write. This not only does it help build their ideas for writing, it provides beautiful examples of sentence structures and syntax, and that's so important, particularly for our EAL learners, so they can understand and know, does this sound like book language? Does this sound like the type of sentence that I would read in a book? Yes, it does, or oh, no, it doesn't actually. Or, I need to make some changes to it. So one example I was talking about graphic organizers, I thought I'd put a little example on here. Now, you have to excuse my poor drawing here. I had to do it. I was trying to draw on my computer screen, which is why it is hard to identify that this character is a pig. You just have to believe me that it is. I wanted to highlight here, writing can't be done in a silo. It needs to be connected to reading. So when we're reading, we're going to look at, say here, I've looked at the Three Little Pigs, and we're going to talk about how the Three Little Pigs has a beginning, a middle, and an end, or something that happened first, something that happened second, and something that happened third. So let's talk about what happened. Oh, yep, we've got the first pig lived in a house of straw, the second pig lived in a house of sticks, and the third pig lived in a house of bricks. So then we can start using, that's our known now, and now we're going to go to the new. So now the students can have an opportunity to use that as a model for their own writing. So I've done this very bad illustration. I'm innovating on this text, and you can see here, I'm going to write about a cat who lives in a grass house. That sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? So here, I'm just getting the kids to illustrate. We're not doing any writing at this stage because we're just planning our writing. Obviously, my next step, once we've once we've done our drawing to help us plan out what we're going to write, the next step is that we're going to either, depending on where they're at in writing, we're going to add labels, or we're going to start writing a sentence for each of these. Or each of these blocks down the bottom becomes one page in our 3-page book, and then we're going to add a sentence to it. So this is something that, because we've done it, we've drawn our plan, students can come back and they won't have to worry about remembering, sometimes they struggle to remember what they wrote yesterday. Hopefully, as their illustration skills develop, they won't have that problem. This is also a way of reducing cognitive load on students by getting them to illustrate their writing before they actually engage in the writing. Another way to develop students' skills in this planning is just that building their ability to orally tell a story and understand how a story flows. So the use of wordless picture storybooks here. I've got Wolf in the Snow and Explorer. They're both an American author, Matthew Cordell. He writes a lot of wordless picture storybooks. We don't seem to have as many in Australia anymore. Jenny Baker's Mirror, although I'd say it's probably a bit older than F to 2. I've put Belinda there by Pamela Allen. Now, that's not a wordless picture storybook, but it's easy to remove the text, and her illustrations are so vibrant that I think it would be a useful text for students to have a go at using the illustrations to come up with their own story. So we're doing this orally, so we can practice just engaging in storytelling, because if we can't write it, if we can't talk it, if we can't say it, then we can't write it. So we're going to make sure that we're doing lots of storytelling orally before we're moving into writing it down. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes in the resource pack. I have pulled this, I think it's very useful suggestions from the Literacy Teaching Toolkit about ideas for supporting our EAL learners with this stage of the writing process. So it's on page 6 of the supporting resource pack. If you don't have the pack, if you go onto the Padlet, the link is on there. I just want you to read through these suggestions from the Literacy Teaching Toolkit and think, well, what are your key takeaways about how to support our EAL learners with this phase of the writing process? And I'll be back in a couple of minutes. Okay, I've just had a little look in the Padlet to see what you've been sharing in there. So share your takeaways. Would be lovely to see those. Okay, let's talk about drafting. This is the transcribing part of writing. This, as I said before, it's about getting your message down, dumping whatever's in your brain onto the paper so that you can shape it later. When our students start to worry about shaping it and doing editing as they're drafting, that's when they start to write less and turn into reluctant writers because they don't want anything to be wrong. So we want to really communicate that drafting is just about getting your message down, and we will always have time to revise the message and to look at the readability of it, the editing of it afterwards. We can't expect it to be a perfectly formed sentence if we're just focused on dumping it onto the page. So I think that's hard to start to shift some of our thinking into understanding and respecting drafting for what it is. Drafting is obviously, it looks different in F than it does for 2 because we're just learning how to get our squiggles onto the page in foundation, whereas in Year 2 we can write some pretty significant pieces of text. So just being aware of where your students are at, and not forgetting that drafting can absolutely include drawing images as well as text. It doesn't always have to be focused on text. So my tips for the drafting phase: students need to see you writing. They need to see you demonstrating for them what this looks like. They need you to model what you're thinking as you're writing. Because when you think back to the start when I was talking about why write, writing is thinking. Your brain is firing 100 miles an hour, questions, problems, solutions, decisions. So you need to open your, I almost think zip the top of your head off so that kids can have a look inside the working mind of a writer. They need you to think your thoughts aloud so they can see, oh, that's the type of thing I should be thinking about when I'm writing. Often we see writing as being a silent act, that is, the hands doing all of the action. Well, actually, all of the action is happening up here. So doing a think aloud as you're writing helps them to tune in to the sorts of the types of thoughts that they should be having in their own head as they're writing. What is the one thing that you want to turn the dial up when you're drafting today? So what's a focus that you want your students to be shining the spotlight on as they're drafting today? Do you want them to focus on how they start their sentences? Do you want them to focus on the words that they're using? When you've decided on your focus, that's the thing that you're going to be talking about in your think aloud when you're modeling for students. It's important in drafting that you provide uninterrupted time for writing. This is so important. Schools, when we're face to face, are crazy busy places, and it's incredible how many interruptions you can have in your class in a day. You can have, announcements over the PA system. You can have people knocking on your door saying, I need 2 kids to help with it. Yep, I'll do that. So all of these interruptions that we have can break our students' flow when they're writing, and that can make it very challenging to get back to the piece that they were writing. So as much as possible, we want to provide uninterrupted time for writing. One interruption that I will bring your attention to is it's a well-meaning interruption from us, and that happens when we set our kids off to write, and everyone's finally got their heads down, and then we say, everyone stop and have a look at Paige's writing. Paige has started with this great word, try and include these great words in your writing. And we've done it from a place of well-meaning because we want to shine Paige's work up as a mentor text, or we want everyone to be more like Paige. But what we've done is we've stopped the flow of writing. So just be really conscious of when you're setting your students, when they finally get the opportunity to be in that independent phase where they get to do the writing, we want to try and protect that as uninterrupted time. The final dot point I've put on here is to think of the importance of drawing as a normal and important part of learning to write. And that means that for lots of our junior writers, we need to move the drawing part of writing to the start of writing rather than do the writing and then illustrate it afterwards. So if we have our students to engage in their or create their illustration first, or create their message through illustration first, that provides an anchor for them to then go and start adding some words or write their sentence, rather than that other way around of let's do some writing and then at the end you get to illustrate it. If they have their illustration there, it just prompts them of what was my message. You know what foundation kids are like when they start writing something and then it's completely not what they were started with. So what was my message? Because I've talked about it, I've done a lot of turn and talk. This is what I'm going to write about. It's about going when I went to the park. So then my picture that I draw is going to be about when I went to the park. So then when I'm ready to start adding text, there it is. There's my reminder there. Oh yeah, that's right. It was all about park. So I'm going to start by labeling it, or I'm going to move into writing sentences about that illustration that I've got there. I didn't think I could talk about drafting without talking about spelling, and I wanted to share this with you. Invented spelling is an important factor in children's early writing and reading development. Their abilities with invented spelling from preschool through the early elementary grades have been known since the 1970s. Researchers have shown that supporting young children's invented spelling promotes their phonemic awareness, that children's invented spellings are a means of gauging their phonemic awareness, and that invented spelling and word reading abilities are closely related. So I wanted to share this with you because sometimes we have an aversion to, oh my goodness, what if kids are writing things in the wrong way? And I think we need to view it as all of our students are on a continuum of learning. Think about that confusing bar graph that I showed at the start. We need to understand that they're on a continuum, and this is one part and a natural part of the continuum when they're just learning how words are formed and building that phonemic awareness. I showed, in the phonological awareness webinar, I showed this diagram about the sequence of phonological awareness instruction. And I wanted to bring this up again because students learning around spelling, it almost follows a similar, and not surprisingly, because as they learn more about phonemic awareness, they start to apply that to their spelling skills as well. But just that idea that when we're talking about how students build their phonemic awareness, then it's usually the initial sounds of words that they start to hear first. So in spelling, they're the ones that we're going to start to see in their writing first. Then they usually move to the end of the word, so they start to hear the final sounds of words. So you'll start to see in their writing that the initial sound and the final sound is often represented. And then they start to, move their way into the middle of the word. And that follows that same phonological awareness instruction, staircase that we looked at back in that webinar. So I think it's important to be conscious of that continuum and what it looks like, and how you can look at student writing and use that to understand where your students are at with their phonemic awareness as well. So if I go back to the literacy learning progressions and start to look at what could this look like with student writing, and I'm looking here at creating texts progressions. So in the very far left in the foundation level, we're looking at the student intentionally creates letter-like shapes or strings, and you can see that in this illustration. I feel like there's an M, a T, an O, maybe an I down the bottom. They draw pictures and shapes. Absolutely a normal part of learning how to write. There's my little graph down the bottom there, so you think, oh yeah, they've got a bit of work to do. Then as they're moving on, you can see the next sort of progression. They write some recognizable letters, usually including their own name. So I would suggest that this student's name was Tanner, because that's the name that is represented at the top left. They identify symbols and letters or drawn with prompting, and there's some TNT good old dynamite in there, and a few A's. So I'm wondering if A may have been a significant instruction recently in this classroom. Haven't quite learned about being generous to the reader in terms of please don't put your illustration over the top of your writing, but that's, they're learning. As you're moving along again, this is, you can start to see this writer, the words that have been highlighted, that's the teacher's support there. So this writer is starting to hear some of those initial and final sounds. So they've got the k in look, and they got the R in after. I look after my mum. I really love this piece. I just think it's so beautiful. And there's the child and mum. I think mum looks like she's in bed, but maybe she is, maybe she isn't. The student writes from left to right, top to bottom. They write letters to represent words. Then we move up to more complexity. They write some appropriate letter combinations. So you can see over on the right-hand side for sky, sky. So they've had a red hot go. Basket, skit. They include noun verb agreement. They write from left to right. They use spaces because their concept of word is much more developed now. They can understand that the space is actually an important part of the reader being able to understand the difference between words. As we move through, I've got a couple of pieces here. The student structures ideas into simple sentences made up of basic verb groups, noun groups. They use adjectives, they express feelings, they write identifiable clauses, often using and as a linking word. They make plausible attempts at writing unfamiliar words. So if we have a look at this top left one, it says, last night I made black slime and I loved it. I never say, and I cannot work out what this next word is, so if anyone wants to enlighten me, just put it in the chat, I'll be really grateful, with it. Because black is my favourite colour. There we go. So they've had a red hot go at some of the unfamiliar words like favourite, because is actually very close, and colour down the bottom. On the right-hand side, to build a telescope out of toilet rolls. Now, I will say, when you give students choice about what they write about, these students had to write an explanation text. They're writing instructions, but they had complete student choice on what they wrote the instructions about. So that's how you end up with a text about how to build a telescope out of toilet rolls. Here it is. You need 3 of them and put them inside each other. Don't you love the spellings of each other? So they're definitely showing more complexity in their understanding of how to represent those sounds with different graphemes. And then we move up to they're structuring ideas into simple sentences. They're using adjectives, expressing feelings, using logical word order. Plausible attempts to spell unfamiliar words. So let's have a look at this text. How to make cookies. Again, this is a student choice on the topic, but not the genre. You need dough, then you need a round cookie shape. Then you put your chocolate chips in your cookies. After that, you set your timer on. You put your cookies in the oven, then your cookies are done. Great, what a lovely piece. Okay, that's it for drafting. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes just to read through the supporting EAL students with drafting. Obviously, this can be quite a complex task and a cognitively challenging task for some of our language learners. So this is page 7 of the supporting resources pack, and I'll be back in 2 minutes. Okay, I would love to see your key takeaways in the Padlet. I will say a little hello to Magpie Primary School too, because I saw your name in the chat. So I'm just going to say hello, guys. Hi, Liz. All right, so moving on to revising. Now, this is the part in schools we spend a chunk of our time on drafting, and we give revising a sideways glance if we're lucky, if it's usually clumped in with editing. So I want to change how we approach revising in schools. And I'm so excited that you're all here tonight so we can start this, grassroots change to carve out more time for revising in how we teach writing to students. Revising is the part where our students learn what makes good quality writing. This is where we get to study our writing and learn how to improve it. So drafting, we're just putting it down on the paper, and now we're going to look at it and see, okay, well, that's what I've done, that's fine, because that's what a draft is. And now I get to shape it, I get to learn about what good quality writing looks like, and now I'm going to apply that to my own writing. So let's carve out more time. The thing about revising is that, and like all of the other areas, this has to be explicitly taught. We so often, and particularly in the senior years, we say, okay, kids, go back and revise it, or revise and edit. And you think, well, what do I actually want them to do when they revise? So it'd be interesting to ask your students, when I ask you to revise your work, what am I asking you to do? And you'll find they usually say, oh, look for capital letters. And then you're like, oh my goodness, I've been calling it the wrong thing. So for revising, we have to demonstrate what does that look like? What are the thoughts that are going through my head when I'm revising? What things might I revise for? I mean, there's so many things that you could revise for. We don't want to overwhelm our kids by trying to get them to revise for everything, right? We just need to narrow it down to one thing at a time. So, my first tip is you have to read the writing aloud. And I'm still trying to convince my nephew Isaac of this one. He still doesn't do it. And you can tell when they haven't done it because they miss out obvious things. So you have to read the writing aloud. The thing with reading it aloud is it allows your brain to compare what it's hearing when you're reading it out aloud with all of those books that the teachers read me over time. Does this language in my writing sound like that book language that I hear all of the time when I'm being read to? So particularly in the junior classrooms, whisper phones are a great idea for this. Whisper phones, which I meant to grab one down off my desk. Whisper phones it's just a little bit of PVC pipe, and it has they're called elbows, just in case you're heading into Bunnings yourself. And they're jammed together to make a little phone, and it just means that you can whisper your writing, and then you can hear it with your own ear. But you have to be so careful because they actually work really well, and you do actually sound quite loud when you're reading them. So if you use a whisper phone, it just means that the noise level in the classroom is more workable for everyone. Now, what I mean by explicitly model what it looks like to revise. Revise is the part of the writing process, I'm going to say, where you have to do the most thinking. It's the most problem solving, the most decision making. When you write a piece of writing and you're thinking, okay, now I'm going to revise it, I'm going to improve the message, there are so many questions. Where might I start in my writing? So if I'm looking for the use of good words, where in my writing is it important to have strong words? That's my first decision. And then I need to start to think about, well, what type of words does this piece of writing need to have in it? Why am I writing this? So if I'm writing it to convince someone of something, then I need to use strong words that are going to convince them. There are so many decisions that go on in this part of the writing process. So my recommendation for F2 teachers is that when you're modelling this, you're going to start by demonstrating how you revise your illustrations or your drawings, because it's only logical that we start with drawing, we do our revisions on our drawing, and then when we come to be using more text, well, we just use that exact same process. We get it down and then we shape it and make changes to it, just as we did with our drawings. I think it sets students up for a logical flow when you start with revising illustration and then move into text. modeling revising for students and talking to them about it as an opportunity helps to stop them from developing the one and done mindset. So grade 2 teachers probably will understand this more. That idea that so many of our students develop is that when we say, okay, time to revise this, they sort of look at us and be like, but it's perfect. This one that I wrote, the first draft, it's perfect. Well, no, it's not. It can always be improved. So that's the idea of one and done. So we don't want our students to develop that. We want them to know that everything they write can be improved. Not because it was wrong, not because it was a bad piece of writing, but because that's the writing process. That's what published writers do. They get their ideas down and then they shape them. And we're going to do exactly the same thing. And then the final part of the revision process, I think it's important to talk about, is using or teaching students how to give each other feedback at this point of the writing process. Now, if we're going to model how to revise our writing, and I said we really want our students to revise for one thing at a time so that it doesn't become overwhelming. Well, how do I as a teacher, especially if I'm not a writer myself, how do I know what to revise? You know, there are so many things that could probably be worked on in this piece. How can I choose the thing that I want to teach my students about revising? Enter the traits. 6 traits of writing, the 6+1 it's often referred to as, probably because that's its actual name. I call it the 6 traits, but it's usually the 6+1 traits. These were created as an assessment tool. So back in the 80s, a bunch of teachers from America were saying we want to assess student writing consistently, we want to have moderation, and we want to know what to look for. Like, what makes good quality writing? What makes a good quality piece of writing? What separates that from a poor piece of writing? So they did an enormous research project where they read thousands of pieces of student writing and they piled them into 3 different piles: poor, okay, excellent, and then studied all of the excellent pieces to say, what is it about this piece of writing that makes it excellent? And what is it about these ones over here that make them not so good? And they came up with these qualities of writing, or these traits of writing. So they had strong ideas, logical organization, strong voice, word choice, sentence fluency, and they had strong conventions as well. And so these then became the assessment criteria. So anytime they looked at a student's piece of writing, they could roll through these 6 things in their head to say, well, how are the ideas of this piece? Yeah, really good. How's the organization? Makes sense. How's the voice? Oh, lacking voice. That's the thing I'm going to teach this group of students. They need to learn how to build voice into their writing. So the idea of these is that it's not saying conventions are unimportant. It's not saying don't ever teach them. My view on this is we need to approach writing that all of these traits are equal in value. So all of the focus we've been putting on conventions all these years, that's perfectly fine, as long as we lift all of the other traits to have that same level of focus, because all together these things create good quality pieces of writing. So if you look at, say, the Book Week winners this year, you're going to find these are going to be in spades. You're going to see all of them exhibited in the winners because they make good quality writing, whether it's by students or published authors. Now, the +1, just in case you're thinking, what is the +1, is presentation. It was added later and it's only applicable to published pieces of writing, which is why it's a +1 and not a 7. The 2 things that I think this graphic needs: audience and purpose. And this is, we need all of our writers to be constantly thinking and having these 2 things front of mind. Why are you writing this and who are you writing this for? So important to know that because it impacts the words that you choose. It impacts how you structure your ideas. It impacts which voice you use when you're writing. So you've got to know who you're writing the message for, which is where publishing comes in, but we'll talk a bit more about that. So I just want to show you a couple of examples of what this looks like. This foundation class, this teacher obviously has a lot more guts than I do because they got let the kids loose with paint two things that I just couldn't stand: paint and glitter. Ugh. So this definitely wasn't in my classroom because there would not be paint. That's for the art room and the crazy art teacher. Sorry, Shannon. So in this class, the students were talking about conveying a message, and so they were asked to paint their message to start off with. And the teacher demonstrated painting her message first. So she talked about what she did on the weekend or whatever it was, and she showed them, this is how I'm going to illustrate this. This is how I do the make a quick person. This is how I'm going to demonstrate the slide that I went on or the swing that I went on. And then the students went off and had a go at doing theirs. Okay. The next thing, because that's the drafting phase, the next thing is they moved into revising. So of course the teacher pulled out her painting that once it was dry and started to say, well, now I'm, looking at my piece of my message, and I'm thinking it's not going to be clear enough for my reader. They're not going to understand exactly what it was that I was doing. So I'm going to need to add some detail to my picture. Which, when it comes to text, that's exactly what we do. We look at it and we go, oh, I need to add some detail. So they were doing it with illustrations. And so the teacher modeled it with her with her illustration, adding more detail so the reader could understand exactly what was happening. And then here's the work of the foundation student. And you can see that she's gone in and she's added extra detail. In the first version, when she articulated what she'd written, she said, oh, this is me. That was what it was about. And once she'd thought more about it and watched the teacher's modelling about adding detail, she was able to go into much more detail about what the message was that she was conveying. So this is the impact of explicit instruction. It's really when we demonstrate and when we do that think aloud, our young writers can sit there and think, oh, that's what it should look like. Oh, that's what I should be saying in my head. That's what I should be thinking about. Oh, I can do that. So really great example. So that was the ideas. You see how I put ideas on the top right-hand side if we're thinking about the traits. If we're thinking about organisation in the traits, this piece, one day I was playing on my dad's pirate ship when a storm came. My dad yelled at me to come to him, but I got flushed away. I love that visual. So what does it look like when we're explicitly teaching revision around organisation? Well, we're going to use a mentor text. We're going to use a text that has a good example of the trait that we're trying to teach. Mentor texts don't need to be published books. They can be student writing. They can be, pieces of writing that you've written. In this example, I'm going to use this, The Great Rabbit Chase by Freya Blackwood. I just love her illustrations, and she's also the author. So we're going to look at it. We're going to look at, because I'm thinking, when I'm reading this, I'm thinking we could do some work on the lead, which is part of organisation. So we're going to look at this book and we're going to see, what did Freya Blackwood do in her lead? Where did she start her action? Mum went out to buy a new pair of gumboots, but came home with a rabbit. Wow, so they didn't do the whole, one day I woke up and then I got out of bed and then Mum thought she might go into town. Bam, she's just bought it, so they've started right in the middle of the action. That's interesting. Let's have a look and see what Bob Graham does. How does he start his story? So this is Let's Get a Pup. And actually today I just read his recent book, his newest book, Maxine, which is just gorgeous. Of course, I just love how he writes. So let's see. Let's get a pup, said Kate. What, a brand new one? Said a now wide-awake Mum. So you can see Bob, he didn't bother, he didn't worry with telling us. One day when I woke up, he just went bam, straight into the middle of the action. And that keeps us engaged as a reader. So we're going to go back to our piece of writing and we're going to see how could we apply this same strategy to our own writing. Now, here, I'll remind you that I talked about the different options that you have as a teacher for explicitly teaching this. You can do modelled writing, which is where you write and you don't ask for any suggestions from the students, from the audience, right? It's just you and your thinking alone. You could engage in shared writing, which is where you start to say, has anyone got any ideas? Does anyone want to suggest how we could start this? You can engage in interactive writing where you ask the students to come on board and give you ideas, but you also get them in the act of, you share the pen with them so they can take responsibility for the transcribing as well. There's guided writing and independent writing. I'm going to suggest you want to stay up the top when you're in the modelling phase. if you want to know more about these teaching practices, the Literacy Teaching Toolkit has some great resources available on it. Just Google Literacy Teaching Toolkit, teaching practices for writing. There's probably some other way to get there. That's just how I do it. It works every time. All right, so when we look at this now, we can borrow it from Bob Graham, and we can say, hey, here's a new start that we could use. Quick, come here, my dad yelled out, but it was too late. Or we could try another one. The storm flushed me straight over the side of our pirate ship. So we're using what we learned in the mentor text and we're trying to apply that to our own writing. And we might have tried lots of different leads just because this is a strategy that we want to practice. Not because the first time we wrote it, it was wrong, okay? It's always because we can learn from others. If we look at word choice, I went to the shop to buy a caravan. I think every single, person in lockdown will be writing this when the lockdown ends. Get me out. So I'm looking at word choice here and I'm thinking, how do I push this student forward as a writer? How do I build their knowledge about good writing? And I'm thinking word choice. So I'm going back to The Great Rabbit Chase, which I've read numerous times with my class. We know it inside out. And I'm particularly interested in this page where she says, we all race down the road after Gumboots. We follow him down a driveway. We tiptoe across the Kilpatrick's backyard. And the reason I'm interested in these is because she's used really strong verbs to describe how they moved, right? So I can imagine what it looks like when they're racing. That I'm thinking they're going really quickly. So quickly the mum's still got her towel on. Oh my goodness. We follow him. We tiptoe, so we're really quiet. So I really love the verbs that Freya Blackwood has used here. So here we're going to start to talk about what other words could you use instead of went to help your reader visualize how you got to the shop when you were buying a caravan. So did you walk? Did you run? We rushed, we crawled, tipped it. Let's just throw some other examples out there. Rushed, I think rushed would be, that's post-lockdown. We rushed out there to get a caravan because there weren't going to be any left. And then we might engage in shared writing, which is when we, brainstorm together to come up with some other suggestions for how we could start this piece or how we could build stronger word choice into this piece. So you can see we're only focusing on one thing. We're not trying to change the whole lot of it. It's just building their knowledge about effective writing. All right, just the final part of revising is that idea of teaching students to give each other feedback. We can't expect they just know how to do it. We find giving feedback really challenging, and we're getting paid. We're the professionals. So we have to build their ability to do this. So I use this tag framework. Jennifer Saravello uses PQP, praise, question, polish, but I think tag's easier. Sorry, Jennifer. Tell something you like, ask a question, give a suggestion for improvement. Now, of course, I'm going to model this to students first. I'm going to get them around me. I'm going to do a fishbowl where everyone's sitting in a circle and I'm in the middle with a student. And I'm going to look at their writing and I'm going to use this framework where I read it and then I tell them something that I like about it. I'm going to ask them a question if I'm confused about something, and then I'm going to give them one idea for something that they might be able to improve. The flip side of this is you need to also teach them how to receive the feedback, because sometimes that's a bit challenging for some of our students who think that their writing is perfect and they don't need your 2 cents of feedback. Thank you very much. So you do have to model that as well. What do you say when someone gives you some feedback? And what shouldn't you say when someone gives you some feedback? That's some pretty interesting experiences with that one. You will get a copy of the slide, so you'll be able to have a copy of that tag. If you want more information about feedback, there's a webinar on the Basto YouTube channel that you can check out, and that will help you with just ways to give effective feedback. All right, I'm going to skip just these last couple of rooms where we're looking at the supporting AAL. You've got the resource, so you'll be able to read that in your own time, because I just want to do a quick chat about editing before we finish up. Editing is another one of those things that we need to explicitly teach. We need to show our students what we mean by editing. What does it look like when we're re-looking at our writing and we've got our lenses firmly planted on spelling, punctuation, or grammar? One of those. Don't confuse them with trying to fix everything at the same time. So here I would encourage you to be mindful of curriculum expectations. When are our students expected to start looking at talking marks? When are our students expected to start looking at commas? So be mindful of when each of those things comes into the curriculum, so you're not sort of pushing kids way out of their comfort zone before they're ready for it. Your students need to know why. Why do I have to start a sentence with a capital letter? Why do I have to end it with a full stop? What impact does that have on my reader? So making sure that they understand that the whole purpose of editing is to make this thing readable, okay? So that your reader can understand how you want the sentences read out. Do they want you to pause here? Do they want you to say it in a loud voice over here? Well, editing is how you whisper those stage instructions to your reader. So all of the punctuation that you use is a little message from you, the writer, to the reader saying, hey, shout this part, please, when you're reading it. My final tip in editing is to bathe your students in correctness. One, I don't know how we came to do it, but when it comes to teaching editing, for some reason, we found ourselves in this teaching where we would constantly show our students sentences that are incorrectly punctuated and then work backwards from there. Let's flip that. Let's show them sentences that are grammatically correct, punctually correct, and start to get them to notice why and apply that to their writing. Bathe them in correctness rather than constantly showing them examples that aren't right or models that you don't want them to copy. If you're using an editing checklist, make sure that you've actually demonstrated how to use it and what's the thinking that goes through your mind as you're using it too. They don't just know how to use those things. All right, I realize it's 5:30. I told you I'm too passionate about this. That's why it's more than 5:30. I just will say our students need publishing opportunities because that's the reason that us writers write. Vicky Spandau says we crave appreciative response as writers. We need to see a real audience interacting with our writing. We want real feedback. That's the thing that lights that motivation up inside of us when you think, oh my goodness, at the end of this term, we're having a publishing party. My parents are coming to read this. I've got to make sure it's my best work ever. Or this book is going to be published in the school library. I need to make sure I take on board all of that feedback that people are giving me so it's a great piece of writing. So this is about getting really creative with how you publish and trying to make sure that you provide as many opportunities as you can for your students' writing to go beyond the classroom. Because we are the least exciting readers and audience for our students. Here's a little book that Invermay Primary School made. My day at school, I put my locker in my bag, I sanitized my hands. Gee, wonder when they made that book. Class books, here's a student who was doing extra work. And how special to see your book published in the class library, especially when you look over at independent reading time and see other people reading your work. Could there be anything more motivating than that? I don't think so. All right, so, oh my goodness, we've made it to the end. I just want to, 3 resources that might be useful for you if you want to learn more about teaching emergent writers. What's next for this beginning writer? Getting started with beginning writers, and speech to print is good if you want to build your knowledge about the syntax of language and those technical aspects of language. But you'll be able to see all of this in the slides that get sent out to you. Okay, that's it from me. I did a very speedy finish. I'm really sorry about that. Hopefully you've enjoyed this webinar series and you've been able to get a lot out of it. It'll all be available on YouTube, so you'll be able to come back and watch it at any stage. That's it from me. I might see you again in a future webinar. Good night, everyone.